Let us pray. O Lord, we give thanks for the bounty of our province, our land, our resources, and our people. We pledge ourselves to act as good stewards on behalf of all Albertans. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to provide oral notice to members of the Assembly that I intend to move under Standing Order 40 at the end of question period today, a motion regarding the excessive use of closure in the Assembly, and with your permission, I'd like to hand copies of this motion out during question period.
30 or 40?
Through the chair, please, first, and then distribution.
Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Member for Bakerville, followed by the Minister of Tourism.
I would like to table copies for all members of an amendment I intend to propose to Bill 21, the Employment Standards Codes, when it is debated later this morning.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the Department of Tourism's annual report as required by statute. It is for the year April 1st, 86 to March 31st, 87.
The member for Grand Prairie, followed by Edmonton Calder.
Mr. Speaker, as Chairman of the Northern Alberta Development Council, it's my pleasure to table the annual report for 1987-88 and at the same time file a conference report on water in Northern Alberta and family violence in Northern Alberta.
Edmonton Calder.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to table for all members copies of an amendment I wish to move to Bill 21, dealing with minimum wage exemptions for disabled Albertans.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Old Stittsbury.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me a great deal of pleasure this morning to introduce to you and through you to my fellow members of this Assembly 40 very energetic young students from grade 6 of the Murdoch School in Crossfield. These students are accompanied by Mr. Barrett and Mrs. Minty, both teachers at the school, and parents Mrs. Brigham, Mrs. Schlender, and Mr. Barry Williams. And I wonder if they would stand and receive the very warm welcome of this Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Hospitals and Medicare. Mr. Speaker, my question is relating to the report tabled yesterday from the Premier's Commission on Future Health Care for Albertans. Mr. Speaker, first of all, the report, I believe, has some excellent suggestions, many of which were put forward by my colleague before from Edmonton Centre. And these include the idea of a hospital ombudsman, regional hospital councils, and increased funding for nursing education. Mr. Speaker, however, the government appears to have stymied the Commission in terms of dealing with such major issues as the high turnover and burnout rate of registered nurses, the role of nursing assistants, nurse practitioners and nurse midwives, community-based nurses, those sorts of issues, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister. I say to the Minister that these are glaring omissions from any report dealing with the future of the nursing profession, and I wonder if the Minister can explain the oversight in terms of the reference given to the Commission.
Mr. Speaker, it would be the government's intention, as the Premier indicated yesterday, to take some relatively early action on the recommendations presented by the Heinemann Commission. But before that, we would certainly want to get some reaction from the people who are most directly involved, the nurses, hospital boards, and others in the system, to the recommendations in the report. Indeed, if there are other recommendations that are brought forward by some of the players in the system, we would want to look at those as well.
Well, Mr. Speaker, so the minister is then saying that they would take a look at these things, even though it's not been part of the commission, that these things could be looked at in the future then?
Well, what I'm suggesting, Mr. Speaker, is that I don't believe the commission meant their report to be all-inclusive of every single problem or concern that nurses might have. It deals with a lot of major concerns, but there are obviously other areas that arise from time to time that need extra work on them. In fact, in many of the Commission's recommendations, they indicate that there ought to be some progressive work by hospital boards and nurses and others in the system to deal with the issues, and they recommend cooperation for dealing with the issues. Now, that's going to take a lot of additional work and effort on behalf of all parties.
Well, Mr. Speaker, to go into what is in the report, one of the things they should have looked at is the right to full collective bargaining, but they were clearly told that this wasn't in their commission. But, Mr. Speaker, to make matters worse, there's one major concern that I have with this report, and that's the government is going to encourage pilot projects involving private nursing companies which would contract their services to an entire hospital or nursing home or particular units within a hospital or nursing homes. Mr. Speaker, the minister knows full well this may square with conservative dogma, but it would make a situation much more difficult, especially with the United Nurses. And my question to the minister, will he show some leadership at this particular time and reject this particular recommendation before someone gets carried away and creates a confrontation unnecessarily?
Mr. Speaker, that's certainly one of the recommendations that falls into the category of those that we would want to get some reaction from those most directly involved before implementing in fact, we need the cooperation of those most directly involved before implementing such an idea even on a trial basis. That means that we would want to hear from hospital boards, the owners of private sector nursing homes, the nurses themselves, perhaps people like the registered nursing assistants as well, before we would get involved in that sort of a recommendation. I think it's a very interesting one, and it's a timely recommendation in terms of the evolution of our healthcare system. But again, we want to carefully assess the reaction of those who are involved in the entire system before we would move on a recommendation of that nature.
Mr. Speaker, I know the word privatization excites conservatives. They start to salivate with excitement every time they hear the word. But my question is specifically flowing from the minister's answer then. It's clear that at least one group has publicly opposed this particular recommendation then. Is the minister saying then, unless there's unanimity, that they will not proceed with this particular resolution? And if so, Mr. Speaker, are they saying that they are actively, if that's not the case, are they actively going to proceed with privatization of nursing services?
Mr. Speaker, no, what I'm suggesting is that that's one of the recommendations that we would want to carefully review with respect to the comments that are made by the various groups who are involved, hospital boards, nurses, and others, before we would take any action. I think it's far too early, Mr. Speaker, to prejudge the support or lack of support for any particular recommendation. The report's been out for less than 24 hours, and people have not had adequate time to reflect on the recommendations that are made in total, and we would like to, I think, see that reflection before we take any action, either rejecting or accepting any of the recommendations. As the Premier said yesterday, generally the report is a very effective one in coming to grips with many of the concerns that have been expressed by nurses. Certainly it was not meant to be totally inclusive of all their concerns, and we do want to hear from the players in the field before we implement it.
Westlock Sturgeon, followed by Calgary Glenmore.
Mr. Speaker, to the minister, I take it from the answers, can the minister then assure the House that there will be no unilateral implementation of parts of this report, or any part of this report, without consultation and meeting again with the various sectors involved?
No, Mr. Speaker, I'm not about to suggest that there won't be some action on some parts or all of the report. It's not expected that everyone would agree totally. Some of the hospital boards may not agree with recommendations in the report, and some of those who are involved the United Nurses of Alberta, for example, may not agree with it. But certainly we're going to look at the entire report, and we're going to listen to the responses that come from the community, those who are involved, before we take any action. But as the Premier said, we do intend to follow up as quickly as possible and resolve some of these issues.
Calgary Glenmore.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, were these recommendations made based on submissions of briefs from the various groups, such as the United Nurses of Alberta and the Association of Registered Nurses?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Hyman advised me that as far as the Commission was concerned, they felt they heard from everyone who was interested in the issue of problems associated with nursing, certainly from all of the major players, including the hospital boards, the Alberta Hospital Association. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that the appendices to the report would indicate that there was every opportunity for Albertans to be involved.
Supplementary to the Minister, one of the main concerns of the nurses was the number of nurses on duty on various floors and during various assignments. Could the Minister indicate whether that decision would be dealt with by government as such, because it's a financial one, or would that matter be left to the hospital boards in terms of final determination and allocation of staff?
Well, firstly, Mr. Chairman, the agreement between the Alberta Hospital Association as representatives of the hospital boards and the United Nurses of Alberta and the other unions involved does deal with the issue of staffing. The report, however, makes a recommendation with respect to the flexibility of working hours, which I think perhaps is at least as important or more important issue than the total number of staffing. The report doesn't provide a solution, but does suggest that management and labor ought to get together and try to work out more flexible working hours for the nursing profession, and that's referring in particularly to weekend work.
Second main question.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question, the member from Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, if you listen to the Premier, the government House Leader recently, you'd think that closure was commonplace in legislatures in the Canadian Parliament. But as of today, all Albertans know that, for instance, it has never been used in Manitoba or Saskatchewan, and only once in the history of Manitoba. So I wonder, under the circumstances, Mr. Speaker, if the House Leader will stand by the Premier's statement of yesterday that closure is as much of a part of democracy as question period is.
Mr. Speaker, obviously the role of question period is quite different from that of the role of the processing of legislation. However, in the processing of legislation, inasmuch as the rules provide for considerable leeway in making amendments and sub-amendments and going on at length by many speakers in the legislature, by many members, Mr. Speaker, I believe that the closure is necessary as a component of that complex set of rules in order to prevent undue delay.
Outrageous.
Undue delay.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to differ.
Forgive me, honourable member. Sure, we'll have to listen very closely to what the questions are, because the member, having proposed a motion under Standing Order 40, puts us into a situation that perhaps this is our anticipation of what's ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be carefully crafting my questions so as not to anticipate the motion I'll be moving. I just want to call these people on being the power junkies that they are. Mr. Speaker, I noted that the minister wouldn't say he does agree with the Premier, so I wonder if he'll now tell the Assembly if it's his intention to invoke closure on Bills 21 and 22 prior to them being called for third reading.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I explained the different role of the question period and of the set of rules that deal with debate, Mr. Speaker, and I did not disagree with the Premier. With respect to the question just asked, Mr. Speaker, it is my understanding of the rules that it is quite out of order to move closure prior to there having been debate on any matter.
So you guys are out of order.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the government House Leader then. Can he tell us just what the government's timetable is for basically stripping all Albertan or working Albertans' rights under 21 and 22? How soon after calling third reading is he going to invoke closure?
Mr. Speaker, this clearly is a question of anticipation, but dealing first with the preamble, the honourable member well knows that the objective of the legislation is to try to provide for what some have called a level playing field, to try to balance the respective interests within society. And with respect to Mr. Speaker, with respect to the question itself, it is quite impossible for me to indicate what timetable the government would have with respect to any matter that comes before the Assembly. That is a judgment call, and it is, I think, a requirement of the government to listen carefully to the comments from various members of the Assembly, and we do that and then make a judgment as to how much debating time is necessary to hear all of the innovative new concepts and suggestions that could be advanced. When those become recycled, Mr. Speaker, and it becomes clear that we're into a delay, then obviously we have to take a decision.
Oh, I don't call 55 amendments recycled, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary question.
Sure, Mr. Speaker. Will the government House Leader, for a change, after moving his government's bills through closure at every successive stage of reading in the Assembly, now commit his government to reviving the democratic tradition of parliaments, Mr. Speaker, by agreeing not to invoke closure at third reading? Why doesn't he do that?
Mr. Speaker, obviously any commitments on my part not to use certain rules of the legislature which are provided for eventualities where there could be, and I will use this expression because we're talking about democracy and how it works, and this legislature is part of democracy. Mr. Speaker, democracy is only effective when there can be decisions made effectively. If it is possible for a group to stop decision-making in a democracy or in a legislature, Mr. Speaker, I consider that to be tyranny of the minority. And that's exactly what those rules are there to...
Honourable Member, Calgary Mountain View, I believe. The phrase "a boo" is not common to this legislature and should not be tolerated. Member for Red Deer North.
Oh, stop. Just have to... I'm trying, Mr. Speaker, have to wait for the din across the floor to settle a bit. To the government House Leader, in light of the fact that we have had many hours and days of debate, many times until after midnight on these bills, can the House Leader verify whether the opposition has faced countless points of order based on needless repetition and total irrelevancy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I cannot respond because part of that is a question of judgment, and I wouldn't wish to offer a judgment on the opposition's other than to reflect on undue delay. Mr. Speaker, I would confirm, however, that as of 1 o'clock today, I believe by my count we will have spent 39 hours and 50 minutes thus far on these two bills and have filled roughly 135 to 140 pages of Hansard.
To Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, without discussing whether anything's more irrelevant than a member for Red Deer North, Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the House Leader, in view of the newfound delight of closure that the government is obviously indulging themselves in, is he considering a system of hours and minutes for each bill as it comes up, 10 minutes for agriculture, 39 hours for labor, 42 and a half hours.
Thank you for the question.
I would like to offer the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party a different perspective. In my position, I see my position as having a responsibility for the effective conduct from the government's point of view of the legislature in terms of its allocation of time, and also for achieving the directions of government for which we were elected. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, as I said before, I will have to make my judgments on the amount of time which each bill deserves based upon the interests of all members of the Assembly from whatever chair they're sitting, to assure that if they have innovative new ideas, if they have improvements to suggest to legislation, if they have additions to suggest to legislation, there should be time to do that, Mr. Speaker. And it's on that basis that all judgments on any bill will be offered.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today is to the Minister of Social Services. Mr. Speaker, despite the glowing praise as government often heaps on itself, its record on matters pertaining to disabled Albertans is a sad one indeed. For example, Mr. Speaker, in Calgary alone, there's some 150 adults with developmental disabilities who are awaiting placement in vocational programs. Another 74, Mr. Speaker, are graduating in the next week or so from school. Question to the Minister, could the Minister indicate what steps she intends to take to address this shortfall in available space for these valuable programs?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I think it's important to note that we don't believe that the best kind of programming that could be made available to these special folks is necessarily in an institutional kind of setting, and there are many more organizations now offering assistance in taking people out to specific job sites and seeing that they receive on-the-job training. But I think it's important to note that a major study has been undertaken by the Honourable Member for Olds-Didsbury, who has compiled information from people across the province, including those who are involved in programming. That information will be discussed widely later this summer with an expectation that recommendations will come forward as to how to better enhance the programming available.
Speaker, while admitting that they can do a certain amount under private enterprise, the fact that there are vacancies there must concern the Minister. And for instance, the Vocational and Rehabilitation Research Institute, VRRI for short, is undertaking for the first time in 10 years a drive, Mr. Speaker, to try to raise funds to cover the shortfall that this niggardly government isn't able to make up, to educate and help these people. What will you do about that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the organizations who are contracted by Alberta Social Services enter into a contractual arrangement. If they wish to go to the community to enhance their programming, surely that's up to the individual organization.
Mr. Speaker, something's the matter when we can upgrade Husky, but we can't upgrade our disabled adults. Mr. Speaker, the VRRI, as you are well aware, coming from Calgary, has a great reputation for innovative research and programs it has developed over the years in dealing with the needs of disabled Albertans. Obviously, that's going to have to be put aside. Does it not concern the Minister that she should be able to go to the Treasurer and get some money to at least keep the research program going and keep these people from going out begging on the streets to do a very necessary task that the government should be doing?
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Honourable Member is placing the emphasis on one particular component of programming. And it is my expectation, and certainly in light of all the evidence available from other jurisdictions and where it has been tried in Alberta, that programming that is available directly in the community seems to be far more satisfactory for a very high percentage of these individuals.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, is to the Deputy Premier. If this government can find, Mr. Speaker, millions, nearly billions, to upgrade the Husky upgrader, to upgrade Mr. Pocklington to make him feel that he is a capitalist along the way, to upgrade Cargill. Why can I not find a few measly tens of thousands of dollars to help upgrade our disabled adult Albertans?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable leader of the Liberals is aware that each department has its own budget, and on a per capita basis, the services given to Albertans are far above that given to any other province. And I hear from the leader that even more should be spent, and of course those kinds of decisions are always under consideration. Perhaps the honourable member is not aware of the percentage of our revenues that go to pay these bills, the high percentage that does come from the energy sector. And it's essential that that industry be kept healthy and that our Alberta young people be kept employed and that the economy be kept in a healthy state. I know it's rather easy, Mr. Speaker, to do, as the opposition is prone to do, to say spend, 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 but they have a short list of when it comes to ideas as to how to pay the bills.
Edmonton Calder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. Groups in Calgary that work with persons with disabilities have expressed to me concern that they are not being listened to by the department. And I would ask the Minister, would the Minister undertake to meet with service deliverers in the Calgary region and discuss the numerous concerns that they have?
Mr. Speaker, I believe that I have met with all groups who have requested a meeting with me, and just a few weeks ago some came out to my constituency office, which is available to them on weekends as well.
Supplementary question to the Honourable Minister, and it's with regard, these, as I understand it, IRTC and VRRI were rather centennial projects in cooperation with the federal government. At that time, the object was that these operations would be rather self-sufficient by being able to supply certain services to the general community. Does that objective still apply? And in terms of the government's policy, what is the government doing to enhance that objective of those organizations?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member raises a very good question, because it is one that over the course of the last few months I have been speaking to with a number of private sector business people who feel that they are now competing against government dollars going into programs. And Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member will be well aware that in many cases products are sold on the market that have been produced in a sheltered workshop or rehabilitation type of centre. And it is my view that government should be involved in enhancing the capacity of those special folks to work in those places or be rehabilitated in those places, but should only pay the amount that is the difference between their capacity to produce and what it is that would normally be met in the private sector area.
Cypress Radcliffe.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Social Services. I wonder if the Minister can assure the Assembly that the Department of Social Services will continue to work with volunteer groups such as suggested to look after these people, rather than the Liberal attitude and the Liberal policy of discouraging volunteerism in this province.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that certainly our document, our paper on caring and responsibility, hopefully lays very carefully the base for the type of participation and cooperation between the voluntary community and government. And Mr. Speaker, I think that it is well known, and hopefully the leader of the Liberal Party has examined all the programming in the province and will realize that community and organizations, for the most part, are those that are directly involved.
Member for Little Bow, followed by Red Deer North, followed by Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Associate Minister of Agriculture in a general sense with regards to the Agricultural Development Corporation and as well as a specific focus. The Alberta Court of Appeal made a decision with regards to deficiency payments, of which the Minister is aware. Could the Minister indicate whether ADC has applied any policy since that ruling that would that have requested deficiency payments to be made by various farmers that are having mortgage and payment problems.
Mr. Speaker, ADC is very carefully reviewing the judgment that the member speaks of, and they are not actively pursuing the personal covenant under their agreements or their foreclosures or quitclaims. But in many cases, the honourable member will recognize that in terms of a quitclaim, it's an agreement between a borrower and a lender to agree to the resolution of a debt. And in terms of the borrower agrees to take certain assets, and in some cases they may agree to take some funds over and above those assets in order to release the borrower from the total debt. And in this case, it's a negotiated settlement. It has absolutely nothing to do with the personal covenant.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Following the decision of the Alberta Court of Appeal, there was room for amendments of some of the Alberta statutes in order to prevent Farm Credit Corporation from taking deficiency payments. Could the minister indicate whether she has received representation from the federal government or anyone else for amendments to the Alberta statutes, for example, the Property Act of Alberta?
No, Mr. Speaker, I have not received any requests. I do not know if the Attorney General has, but certainly I have not.
Could the minister indicate whether any directives have gone from her office or any other office of government to the Treasury branches of the province that would prohibit their ability of collecting on deficiency judgments?
Mr. Speaker, no directive has gone from my office, and I certainly can't speak for the Provincial Treasurer or the Attorney General, but no directive has gone from my office with regard to this, with the exception of a directive to ADC to review the situation and give me an evaluation of it.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary. In terms of some farmers that hold ADC loans and others, at present, the grazing associations of southern Alberta are unable to keep the cattle on the grazing leases. For example, the Lowman Grazing Association has to return cattle as of July 8th and August 1st. Could the Minister, Associate Minister, or the Minister of Agriculture indicate whether the government is considering any kind of financial assistance in these cases? That was sneaky.
Mr. Speaker, I know that the ADC borrowers in the province who may have cattle on the grazing reserves are certainly concerned with the lack of moisture to provide adequate grazing, and certainly the government recognizes that problem. The minister may want to add to my comments, but I can only tell the member at this time that I've noticed farmers using their ingenuity to provide pasture. There's lots of new fences going up. I've talked to the Burnt Lake, Fort Macleod, and Ponoka auction. At this point in time, there is no panic selling of cattle. There's a few more than normal cow-calf pairs reaching the market, but certainly no herd liquidation. The only one I heard about specifically was at Fort Macleod, and a fellow had sold half of his herd, the half with the bull calves, so that he had the heifer calves for replacement next year. And I know that farmers all over the province are thinking about...
Thank you, Honourable Member. We've really gone astray grazing on this issue. The chair showed its prejudice for southern Alberta on that one. I apologize to the House. Supplementary, back to the main issue, West Luxturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, do not apologize. You're on the side of the angels on that one, because I'm going to continue. Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the minister, while expressing the disappointment that she still hasn't informed her watchdogs to call off foreclosing or chasing on a personal covenant. And will the minister in their bedtime reading put down the new Saskatchewan Farm Security Act, which puts into place legislation which forbids the foreclosure of farms for 3 years on the home quarter, and in addition stops any pursuit by the FCC or the ADC type of arrangement they have over there.
Thank you.
Foreclosures in Alberta, which forbids their...
Whoa, horse. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I do hope that you will allow me some leeway in responding to this question, which has been asked again and again and again. On June the 3rd, and the member doesn't like the answer. On June the 3rd, the member asked the question. On May the 17th, the member asked the question. On May the 12th, the member asked the question. On April the 26th, I said you don't like the answer.
You should get it right pretty
On
soon.
April the 15th, Mr. Speaker.
Next, Honourable Minister, may the Chair assume that the answer is still the same? Good. Then the member will now look up Hansard, and we now recognize Red Deer Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, I assume the 25-year veteran gets the opportunity to chew his cud once in a while in question period. But back to the original topic, I'd like to ask the minister if an ADC client is unable to make all or part of his or her mortgage payment because they've used the funds that they have available to make payments on operating loans or trade accounts, does she consider then that they have tampered with ADC assets and as a result the ADC has the right to try and realize on the personal covenant?
Mr. Speaker, in the preface to his question, he talked about chewing one's cud, and I can assure him that the honourable member to his right has never had a drought situation where there's a shortage of forage. But in direct response, only you and I caught that.
Nick doesn't know what the word means. You're gonna get cut off.
But in direct response to your question, each situation has to be dealt with on its own merit. Certainly, if borrowers are trying to meet their debt obligations throughout the community and through ADC and are talking to the lender, they would not be penalized. It's only in cases where there's blatant misuse of or transfer of ADC property. In some cases, the new index deferral plan will be of assistance to those people.
Member for Red Deer North, followed by Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to direct a question to the Minister of Career Development and Employment. At this particular time of year in Red Deer, and as a matter of fact throughout the province, thousands of high school students are hitting the streets in anticipation of finding employment. Their anticipation is high, and I'm wondering if the Minister can tell us if his department is doing anything to help high school students in their job searches.
Mr. Speaker, in response to the member for Red Deer North's question, there's a couple of things that we try and do to assist high school students that are coming into the labor market this time of year. As a matter of fact, within the next week, I would assume. Firstly, the honourable member should know, and all members should know, that we have more students employed in Alberta today than in the history of this province. Some 99,000 students are working in the province, Mr. Speaker, and we expect as a result of high school getting out for the summer, about another 30 to 35,000 students will be out looking at jobs. Now, two things that we try and do to address this issue. First thing that we do is we hire a student, conducts job search techniques in the high schools, and they go in and they have conducted these programs for some 23,000 high school students to give them an idea of how to look for a job in the summer.
The second thing, of course, is a career and life management program that is instituted by the Minister of Education in the schools, also has job search techniques incorporated in that curriculum. The other thing that we have done and announced yesterday, Mr. Speaker, is we have put another $1 million into the summer temporary employment program to facilitate high school students coming into the job market for this summer.
Supplementary to the Minister, for future reference in upcoming years, has the Minister been able to analyze some of the factors that have been that have caused this significant drop in unemployment for future reference and anticipation there?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the unemployment rate for youth has dropped from 19.1% last year to 12.4% this year. It is a very significant drop in the unemployment rate. Now, coupling the drop in the unemployment rate with the increased number of students looking for jobs, makes that number even more significant, because it's not young people leaving the labor force. They're coming in at the same time the unemployment rate in that area is going down. So it's very significant, and one of the reasons, obviously, Mr. Speaker, is that the health of the economy is significant enough to be able to absorb young people looking for jobs while companies are trying to expand their businesses, need temporary summer help, or for people that are going on holiday vacation. So it is for those reasons, and obviously we have record numbers of young people working in the labor force, Mr. Speaker, for the summer, and we haven't changed our budget substantially since last year, so it's very encouraging. I should also note to the member that the average wage has increased this year compared to other years too.
For information purposes for high school students doing their job searches, has the Minister been able to categorize the types of jobs that they may anticipate finding?
Mr. Speaker, in the summer temporary, Mr. Speaker, the opposition may not find youth unemployment interesting to them, and it certainly is to the members on this side of the House. So I would hope that they would allow me to continue, because we take this matter very seriously. The types of jobs for young people in the summer vary, Mr. Speaker. We have various elements. We have the provincial government department that allows young people to come in and get on-the-job experience in jobs that are related to their career path. We also have the community element that allows for nonprofit organizations and Métis settlements to hire young people through the summer months. Mr. Speaker, it is difficult to try and determine the nature and the types of jobs, but I think suffice to say that any work experience for young people at this age is very important, and the experience that they will carry with them for the rest of their life.
Well, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Career Development or the Minister of Education, is the Minister concerned that with the strength of the youth job market and the wages being offered, that students in the fall may in fact be discouraged from returning to school and may stay in the job market?
Mr. Speaker, that is an obvious concern of myself in this responsibility, and that if we are encouraging young people to find a job, particularly if it's a summer job after they finish grade 12, that they understand the importance of continuing their education. I had the opportunity to speak to the graduating class of Emmanuel Christian School in Lethbridge, and that subject did come up, Mr. Speaker, and all we can do is point out to them that we have the highest level of educational attainment in this province, and for that reason it's very competitive in the labor market, that you have to have a high level of education to be competitive, and a high level of skills training. I would hope that the teachers, the educators, and the parents, and we as MLAs and legislators can encourage young people to take temporary employment, but at the same time encourage them to go back and improve their education.
Member for Edmonton Belmont supplement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the third summer that the minister has announced STEP programs late in the year, 2 announcements for the same buck. I'm wondering if the minister is ever going to come clean and announce one project with 2 different start-up dates rather than making cheap political points at the expense of young Albertans.
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated earlier, we've just seen an example of the opposition's attitude towards youth unemployment. We have moved on an initiative to put another $1 million into the STEP budget for the 30 to 35,000 young people coming into the labor market that will be looking for jobs this summer. If he thinks that's cheap political action, Mr. Speaker, I take exception with it, and so will the young people that get jobs under this program.
Vegreville, main question.
Again,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions today are to the Minister of Environment. Mr. Speaker, the release of massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the Earth's atmosphere is generally considered to be the major cause of the so-called greenhouse effect. Now, this warming trend is predicted to disrupt the Earth's climate in a number of ways, and certainly disrupt agriculture, not the least of which is a trend towards increasing drought in the province of Alberta. Now, Mr. Speaker, recognizing that 7 world leaders gathered in Toronto last week at the Economic Summit identified global climate change as a priority issue and made reference to the important World Conference on the Changing Atmosphere to be held in Toronto next week, I want to ask the Minister, because Alberta has a chance here to truly lead the way, I'd like to know what innovative, made-in-Alberta approach to combat the greenhouse effect the Minister is sending with this government's representatives to that conference in Toronto next week.
Well, what a delightful question, Mr. Speaker. Chance to recount a little bit of history here. The honourable member should be aware that in September 11, in fact, of 1987, at an international conference sponsored by Canada for some 60 nations of the world, a conference held in Montreal, the first ever environmental protocol was signed. That particular protocol basically dealt with such matters as the ozone layer, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and basically called on the signatories to the agreement to take certain steps. That information has been provided to all members of the Assembly. That international conference, which was held in Montreal in September of 1987, was a direct result of input provided by this government of Alberta to the Federal Authority in previous years to that. And I would also like to point out that it was in the year 1986 that this Minister of the Environment served as the National President of the Canadian Council of Resource and Environment Ministers and was very active in providing information, dialogue, and suggestions to the Federal Authority with respect to that matter. The conference that will be held in Toronto very shortly is a direct result of this continuing impact. I should also like to point out that it was 1 week ago in Halifax on Friday of last week that I signed and was a signatory to a communique that went to the Prime Minister of Canada asking the Prime Minister of Canada to raise environmental matters at the summit, and such matters were raised by the Prime Minister of Canada in Toronto earlier this week, and the communique that did come out listed 3 clauses associated with environmental matters on an international level.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a lot of talk and no answers, but is the Minister aware that authorities around the world identify the major cause of the greenhouse effect as the burning of fossil fuels? Would he agree with the statement by the federal government's atmospheric advisor, Dr. Hengveld, who states that when you use the biosphere as your energy source, you're not contributing to the net increase of CO2 in any way? In other words, the best solution to reverse the greenhouse effect is ethanol.
Well, I think, Mr. Speaker, that there's absolutely no doubt that what the cause, or one of the causes, is of the greenhouse effect in the world. And we've talked about that, and surely if the member from Vegreville had any degree of decency and honesty with respect to the question he just raised, he would then simply also, with some degree of admiration, congratulate the current Minister of the Environment in this province of Alberta for talking about this matter for nearly 2 years and raising it on frequent occasions. The member from Vegreville, I'm sure, missed the opportunity to join with me when I stood on the steps of this Legislative Assembly some months ago and met with a series of environmental groups in our province and basically said that there are a number of initiatives that we have to take, not only in Alberta, but in Canada.
Thank you. Thank you, Honourable Member. Time for question period has expired. May we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Okay, thank you. Supplementary, Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary, he may not be the best one, but we're certainly hopeful that he's the only one. But seriously, though, I will send the Minister a copy of our background paper that explains the role that ethanol has to play in combating the greenhouse effect, and hope that he'll take that to Ontario. My question, recognizing that the Minister himself signed the National Task Force report on the environment and economy that refers to the importance of having a sustainable economic development, in other words, linking the economy and the environment, is the Minister prepared to commit the resources of his department to work for a made in Alberta solution, that is developing an ethanol industry that will help improve our economy and clean up our environment at the same time?
Gee, Mr. Speaker, I simply once again don't know where the member from Vegreville has been for some period of time. He presents himself to this assembly with a fair degree of religious zeal and fanaticism on this particular subject, but conveniently seems to ignore certain very important steps that have occurred. And I would like to draw to the attention of the honourable member from Vegreville the budget address of 1987. And I would like to refer to him to page 85 in that particular budget address of 1987. Not 1988, but 1987, when it basically says, in talking about a fuel tax in our province, that propane, methanol, ethanol, and natural gas will not be subject to tax. Now, that initiative was taken nearly 15 months ago. There is a subsidy provided in the province of Alberta with respect to ethanol, notwithstanding all of the subject matters that have been raised. In addition to that, one member of this assembly, the very distinguished member from Ponoka, has on the order paper, orders of the day, on this particular agenda that we have, talking and asking the Legislative Assembly to take certain steps with respect to ethanol. Now, these matters are before the House. These matters have been put in place. Discussions have been held. The responses have been provided by the very dynamic Minister of Agriculture in our province with respect to ethanol. I am a signatory, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I wonder if people in the galleries think that today happens to be Friday. Vegreville, final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I've just about given up hope for an ethanol industry with this oil industry cabinet, but if we found an advocate, I'm thankful, and I'll do all I can to help the Minister. I'd like to ask him this question. He's had a little time to think about it because I asked his colleague, the Minister of Community and Occupational Health last week, will the Minister support the more rapid removal of toxic lead compounds from gasoline and its replacement with clean-burning ethanol rather than the petrochemical?
Thank you. Thank you, honourable member. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the removal of lead in fuels in this country will be complete no later than the end of 1992. That has been an initiative that ministers of the environment in this country have worked with the federal authority in putting in place. That announcement has been made, initiative has taken place, alternatives to lead are in place, and we have a very clearly defined policy for implementation across this country. Once again, it seems that the simple recanting of a policy by the NDP is simply saying, well, it's not enough and it's too late. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that a very dramatic initiative has occurred in this country. It has been agreed to by all of the provincial jurisdictions of this country. That policy will be implemented. It is on schedule, and quite frankly, it's ahead of many jurisdictions in the world. I think we should be very proud of what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, and we should look back to see what it is we're doing periodically, Mr. Speaker. By the end of 1992, lead will not be a factor in gasolines and fuels in this country.
Stedtler, member for Stedtler, followed by Calgary Buffalo.
A supplementary to the Minister, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if he would also comment and perhaps press for the removal as well of another heavy metal compound used for raising the octane in fuels, commonly known as MMT.
That matter is already underway, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alberta is one of the very few provinces where the tax structure on gasoline leaves leaded gas 2 or 3 cents cheaper than unleaded and encourages its use. And I'm wondering whether the Minister of Environment, who's responsible for this area, has been pushing for an increase in tax on leaded gas and might even consider using the funds for the tax to help develop an ethanol industry in this province.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's very important to bring the member from Calgary Buffalo up to date with respect to the fuel taxation regime that does exist in the country of Canada. And by way of that, I would like to draw his attention to the budget address given in 1988, And if one takes a look at the gasoline taxes that does occur across the country of Canada, one would look that in Alberta the fuel tax per litre is 5 cents in Canada, and by comparison in Liberal Quebec it's 14.4 cents. In Liberal Ontario it's 8.3 cents. In British Columbia it's 9.9 cents per litre. And Mr. Speaker, I can provide that information by simply recanting the situation in the other jurisdictions in this country. But there's absolutely no doubt that Alberta has the smallest amount of gasoline tax of any jurisdiction in our country. And just to repeat again, it goes from a minimum of at least 7 cents per litre in Saskatchewan to 14.4 cents per litre in Quebec. And in Alberta, it's just a very modest, paltry 5 cents per litre.
Time for question period has expired. Request under Standing Order 40 by Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, under our House rules, we have the opportunity to consider a motion when it is determined to be of an urgent nature by the Assembly. Prior to arguing the urgency of the motion, I'd like to read the motion out and get your agreement to proceed with the urgency debate.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The motion was circulated earlier to the whole House. No need for that. Please to speak to the...
On the urgency right now, Mr. Speaker, that's fine with me. Mr. Speaker, the urgency of this matter is that if we don't contemplate now requiring the government not to further invoke closure on bills that have in both levels of their debate, both stages of their debate, suffered closure motions, that we won't get a chance again. In other words, today is the only day that we can contemplate this motion. I urge members to agree to the urgency of the matter, because both at second reading, which is the first opportunity for debate, and at committee reading, Bills 21 and 22 suffered closure. That's after Bill 10, the Interprovincial Lotteries Amendment Act, suffered closure at third reading. That makes 5 times in a matter of 6 weeks. I'm sure this is a record not only for Canada, but that's my point, that it may also be a record for parliamentary democracy. I'd like to see that record stopped now while we have the opportunity to stop it. If we don't stop it now, Mr. Speaker, quite frankly, we know what's up for debate later today is Bill 21 in committee, and closure will be invoked. We've had notice. Monday, government business. We have no guarantee now, following the questions that I raised with the government House Leader today in question period, that Bill 21 and 22 might not come up for third reading, after which he has the right to invoke closure again. I'm asking members of this Assembly to say, stop this. It really is reckless. It's unnecessary. It's damaging the democratic tradition in the Alberta Assembly. The urgency is that today is the day. It is the only day that we can agree to do this, Chairman, or Mr. Speaker. If we don't agree today, it may be too late, and that would be a real shame. I've made the point about, the power addiction that I see happening here. I urge members of the Assembly to agree with me in this motion. It really is important in the name of democracy.
Under Standing Order 40, only the mover may state the case of urgency. Those in favor of giving unanimous consent, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. No. Request fails. Orders of the day. That's not closure, Honourable Member, for West Loch Sturgeon. It's